Hello friends and welcome. In today's video here, I thought I would share with you one of my favorite summer recipes. Now, one of the reasons I love this recipe is because it's so quick and easy to make. You really only need a couple of ingredients. It's a really light and refreshing, but also satisfying meal, especially in the summertime. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the energetics as we get cooking. For our recipe today, we will be making a creamy summer squash soup. And so you will need some summer squash. Now in our recipe today, I am using the yellow squash. So I'm using yellow zucchini. I'm also using some little patty pans. You can actually use any summer squash that you'd like. So if you just have zucchini, like a green zucchini around, you could use that as well. And you'll be wanting to have about the equivalent of 4 medium-sized summer squash. So like I said, I'm using patty pans. So you could use, a bunch of little small patty pans or maybe a couple bigger like a green zucchini, but it's the equivalent of about 4 medium-sized summer squash. Now I'm also using fresh basil from my garden, and I'm using about a cup. You could see, I'm about at a cup and a half. The recipe that I'm offering here usually calls for about a cup of fresh basil, pretty tightly packed. And those are the 2 main ingredients in our recipe. The other minor ingredients are just a little bit of salt, olive oil, and some water. So you can go ahead and cook alongside me, or of course you can pause the video and get your things and cook after the video as well. So to begin here, I'm going to take about 3 tablespoons of olive oil, and I'm going to pop that here into my pot. And this recipe is very forgiving, so it doesn't have to be exact. If you have a little less or a little bit more of one of the ingredients, you should be absolutely fine. So if you really like basil, you could add a little extra basil, or you could add a little extra or a little less of the zucchini, either way. So I'm just going to turn on the pot here and get that zucchini going. Or get that oil going, I should say. And you'll want to go ahead and chop your zucchini now in little rounds. So if you're using, the summer squash this way, then you'll want to cut them into little rounds. Patty pans, around the same shape. And I'll just finish up here by cutting these 2. With the patty pans, I just trim the edges off. Similar for the zucchini, I'll just trim the little ends off. And then I go ahead and just cut them into rounds while that oil is heating. Now we will be blending eventually this soup with the immersion blender, so the chopping again doesn't need to be exact. Just thin enough that they'll kind of cook through to begin as we pop them in our pan. Okay, so I've chopped up the remainder of my zucchini, and my oil is just about heated now. So I'm going to start throwing in the zucchini, lowering the heat a little bit on the oil. And I'll just give the zucchini a little bit of a stir to coat all of the zucchini in the oil. And you'll want your heat at about a medium or so for now. Now we're going to let the zucchini just cook for around 10 minutes or so. So you just want to make sure that the summer squash there is coated in oil and that they start to soften. So you can kind of continue to give it a stir as they cook. And in about 10 minutes or so, the zucchini or the summer squash will start to be a little bit softer, a little bit more transparent. And then at that point, we'll add our next ingredient. Now, I'll just let this cook for a minute and just chat a little bit about some of the energetics of the foods that we're using. So zucchini is a wonderful food to use in the summertime because it's considered more bitter and astringent. So these are qualities that we want to increase in the summertime. Summer, of course, has more heat, and this can affect our bodies and our minds. And so the Eastern systems, like Ayurveda or Chinese medicine, really point to the need to change our diet and our lifestyle based on the external climate, the external environment. And so in the summer, we need to generally add a little bit more of the bitter and astringent foods in order to counteract heat. So in Ayurveda, we say that the summer squash have more of these bitter and astringent qualities. In Chinese medicine, we say that the summer squash have still bitter qualities, but they're also cooling, they're refreshing, they actually are more yin. So oftentimes vegetables that have a higher water content, like as you can see the summer squash are more watery vegetable, they generally have more of that yin quality, which is what we really want to support in the summer, because of course summer can be kind of dehydrating. And so then we just want to increase some of those qualities in the meals that we're making. Now we're also using basil in this recipe, a smaller amount, but basil is a little bit more pungent and heating. And so of course it's growing in abundance right now. I got, all of this squash from the market this weekend, and the basil is just, skyrocketing in my garden. And so you definitely want to be eating basil this time of year, but because it is a little bit heating, it's nice to counteract its energy with other foods that are a little bit more yin and a little bit more cooling. And so this recipe really works in that way. I'm just going to give the zucchini about 5 more minutes of sauteing, and I'll see you back in just a minute. Okay, so we're back, and the summer squash here has been cooking for about a total of 10 minutes. It's starting to get nice and soft, and I've just continued to stir it and coat it in the oil. Now our next step is to add the basil, and we will be eventually using a hand blender like this one, so we'll be pureeing the whole thing. If you don't have a hand blender, you could use just a blender like what you use to make a smoothie to do a similar action, so that's fine. But the chopping's not so important because we will be blending it. For the basil, I'm going to take about a cup of the basil and just roughly chop it real quick. So just roughly chopping it into smaller pieces. And then we'll throw the basil into the pot. Okay, so I've roughly chopped my basil, and then I'm going to just add that into the pot with the summer squash. I have the heat now down on low, and I'm just stirring the basil in and coating it as well. Okay, so the heat's down on low, and again, I'm gonna let this cook, just stirring regularly for around 5 to 7 minutes, so not super long for the basil. You can notice almost immediately the basil starts to wilt. So just continue to stir it, make sure that it's all mixed in there. And then we have this beautiful fragrant mix of basil and the summer squash. Now, a couple things to remember when you're shopping for these ingredients. It's super important, especially in a dish like this where there's only a couple of ingredients, to make sure that you're getting really fresh vegetables. They have so much flavor, they have so much more aroma, they're so much richer, especially in a dish like this where really there are just a few ingredients. So like I mentioned, the vegetables that I'm using are local to my area. They're super fresh from local farmers and from my own garden, and that is really the best way to make a recipe like this one. Okay, so the basil is just about cooked enough here. It's just wilted really nice. We'll just give it about a minute longer. And to prepare, our next step is to add some water. So I have 2 cups of water here ready to go, and then we'll add another 2 cups. So it's a total of 4 cups of water we'll be adding into our pot with the summer squash and the basil. And then we'll also be adding about a ½ teaspoon of salt. So you can grab those ingredients. I'll just do that now. So I'm adding about a ½ teaspoon of salt in with the veggies, giving it a good stir. Okay, and then I'm adding my first couple cups, and I'll give it another really good stir here. And 2 more cups of water. So a total of 4 cups of water, And then here, we'll just want to bring it back up to about a boil. Once it has come to a boil, you can bring it back down to a simmer. And then we'll let it simmer for about 20 minutes. And I like to have just a lid on it, just slightly ajar. And so then we'll just simmer it for 20 minutes and I'll see you back here at that point. Okay, so we're back. I brought the mixture with the water up to a boil and then down to a simmer, and it cooked for about 20 minutes. So now it is really well cooked. I'll just pop off the lid here and show you. We've got this beautiful mix of the yellow squash with the basil. And from here now, I'm going to turn the heat off entirely. And I'm going to use my immersion blender. Now, sometimes it's nice to allow it to cool just a little bit. You don't want to, of course, send out any hot water on your skin or anything like that. If you don't have a hand immersion blender, you can now just pour this very carefully into just like a juicing blender. And you could even do it in smaller batches if needed in order to puree it. But I will use the hand blender. So basically I just plug it in and I just make sure that it is submerged in the water. And then I just go ahead and blend it. Now I like it to be fairly creamy. So I'm gonna blend it really, really well until all of the veggies are fully blended into the water. Okay, so we're back and I have fully blended the soup. So it's really creamy. Remember, the more you blend it, the more watery the soup becomes. But it's a good idea to get all of the big chunks, the veggie chunks out. It's this beautiful green color now from the basil, of course, and my yellow summer squash. From here, I'm gonna just add a little bit of pepper to taste. So you could taste it and see how much or how little pepper you'd like to add. I'll just add a couple of grates here and give it a little stir. And then I'm going to ladle it into a bowl and we'll top it with a little bit of extra basil if you have some left over. So just this gorgeous, creamy, smooth, really light and refreshing summer soup. Great for the summertime, but of course you could have this any time of year, especially when the zucchini are plentiful, which of course is spring to summer. So we'll just add a little bit of extra basil there on the top, and we have our gorgeous, creamy zucchini or summer squash soup. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoy your soup and take care.